The recording started. Sorry, I can't see that.
Yeah,
Dave?
go ahead. It
Yeah.
started.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Tridion Docs 15 Bootcamp presentation for collective spaces and client tools. My name is Varun Sood, and I am a product owner for Tridion Docs 15. Today, we're going to have a small agenda for us, starting with collective spaces. We're going to see how users would access collective spaces after intervention from after introducing the modern authentication and access management. Then we'll take a look at some of the feature enhancements and user experience enhancements that were done for collective spaces, followed by a small demo. Then we'll come back and take a look at some of the feature enhancements that were done for client tools, and also look at some compatibility upgrades that we did before the release. And we'll take a look at a small demo for client tools as well. Let me start with collective spaces. As we've introduced modern authentication and access management for Tridion Docs 15, and this has been covered in great detail in the bootcamp session 1 and day 1. I'll just give you a quick recap on how we provide access to users in Tridion Docs 15 for collective spaces and client tools. So access management is a way to manage users' access for all RWS applications from a single location. And when you log into access management, you can see the list of identity providers. And Tridion Docs identity provider option comes out of the box as a default option. And you can configure any other identity provider as you like. Here is an example. You can see Azure AD that was added. There are two ways to basically manage user access to RWS applications. The first one is at the identity provider level. We're going to take a look at that first. And then the second one is at the user level. We'll take a look at that after that. So when you go into a Tridion Docs identity provider, by default, you'll see all the users have access to all Tridion Docs applications, except for access management. And that access is specifically assigned to the role of an administrator who will have access to access management application. And if you want to allow group access to users based on their roles, and at identity provider level, you can create a new claim. For example, here I've created a new claim with role type reviewer, and I have assigned application only for access to only review space for all the users who have role type reviewer. You can do the same by adding more claims for manager, for example, who wants to access only organized space. Role type author could be multiple applications, and so on and so forth. Then at the user level, you can also select a user from the list, and then you have access to the list of applications that are assigned to a user. You can, in addition to the identity provider level access, you can also revoke or provide more access to applications at the user level. For example, in an instance where um, a reviewer would also like access to draft space in addition to review space, you can override that and for that specific user give access to draft space. But we would assume most of the access management will be done at the identity provider level. And of course, like I mentioned before, this is covered in great details in the bootcamp session 1. Now that we've seen how a user's access management is done for client tools and collective spaces, let's see some of the feature toggles that are there, and let's see how we can enable or disable draft space and review space, and some of the features within draft space and review space. So in organized space, if you go under settings, system and default settings, you have a section for feature toggles. Now, by default, out of the box, these are all disabled and customers can enable it. A note here is that all of these options involve additional licenses and costs. And if customers have an option, then they can enable this from organized space. Now, in case where those options are disabled, then there's not going to, and if you go in organized space and if you select a publication, you will not see any options to open that publication in draft space or review space. In the second screen shot that you can see here is only draft space enabled, and you can see an icon for a pencil, which you can use to launch this publication into draft space. And on the third option, you can see both options are enabled for draft space and review space, and you can see these icons, and you can launch applications, launch a publication in both draft and review space. Now, if in case the options, the feature toggles are disabled and users, for example, have access to the URL of a publication and they try to access it using a browser, they will see an error message saying the draft space and review space uh, is disabled, and they will have to contact the administrator to enable it. And similarly, for document history for both draft space and review space, there's an option that you see, if enabled, you see an option as called show changes next to the status menu here. And if the option is disabled, this menu is not visible to the users. Now let's take a look at some changes that were done to the outline. Here's an example from the draft space, and similar examples, similar options are available for review space as well. Here we've gone from the previous version of Tridion Docs. We've gone from two layer UI to a 4-layer UI. The outline from was previously available on the sidebar has now moved onto the left hand side and is available at all the time. That's you can of course collapse and expand the outline, and that gives you more space to view content. We've also introduced balloons for annotations, which kind of gives a better user experience to create annotations and view them side by side while you're viewing the content or accessing the outline at the same time. And we have access to sidebar options also available at all times, which is also, of course, you can expand and collapse that at any time. So it kind of gives you options to access more features while on a single screen without many clicks and going back and forth. Now let's take a look at the new introduction to badge icons. Badges were also part of previous version of Trading Docs, but we've added an intuitive icon options here. So badges basically highlights are used to highlight components that need attention by an author or a reviewer, and they are primarily driven by the status of the components. We have an element called status to focus, which has an icon attribute within it. And using that icon attribute, you can set these icons in place for various statuses that you would like to focus on. If the icon attribute is missing, then the status acronym is used. For example, here you can see this is an acronym for that's the name of the status in translation. So we choose it's using IT as an acronym there. And if, for example, the status to focus element is missing completely, then you would see the regular icons that are associated with that component. Using the badge icons, you can also click on an icon and directly get redirected to that specific component, and you can start editing or making changes as you like. For the icons, we are using the Font Awesome library of icons, version 6.1.1. Out of the box, we have pencil icon for draft statuses and comment pen icon for to be review statuses set as default, but these are customizable and you can use the icon attribute here to change those icons. We'll take a look at this a little bit more detail during the demo as well. And we've also added V status to be reviewed out of the box in draft space for users with reviewer role. This also helps us manage statuses, icons, not just by status, but also based on a role. Let's take a look at some of the improvements that were done for mixed content. Mixed content is when an XML element has text as well as there are child elements within it. And in previous versions, editing and rendering of mixed content posed some issues in collective spaces. And primarily when the content was created in Oxygen or XMetal, and it was opened in draft space. There were some issues with editing and rendering those mixed content. The primary editing behavior that we wanted to handle was what to do when a user tries to hit enter key in draft space. Some example that you can see on the side is, for example, here is a prerequisite element, and then there is text inside it, which also has a separate p tag with text inside it. So it's mixed example of mixed content. The other example that you can see is a context element which has text, and then it has ordered list items which also has text inside it. Some improvements that were done for mixed content was when an element contains text and the user hits enter, the existing text gets wrapped in a p tag and the cursor in the new line starts with a new p tag, and you can start typing and it wraps it around a p tag, and then if you press enter again, the next line starts with a new p tag. This only applies if there are multiple p child elements allowed for that specific case. For the list element, the enter is preferred, and a natural behavior is to create a new list item onto the list, and not a p tag. So if a user, when using a list element, wants to create a p tag, can do shift plus enter, and within a single list li tag, there can be a new line that gets added and user can start entering text there. Our domain specific library has also been extended with default text container element. This can be used in case just the use of p tag is not sufficient and mixed content needs to be handled slightly differently for a specific element, but it's an option that's available. Also, making changes to mixed content helped us resolve some of the rendering issues that were there in the previous version. As you can see on the screen, on the left hand side is an inline ph and xref element which were not rendering correctly, and those are now fixed. As you can see here, it's fixed, and then here as well is fixed. Similarly, there's been some improvements for rendering of referenced content, specifically conref and varref. The rendering previous version was not correct in some cases, which is now a lot better, as you can see on the screen. Now let's take a look at some improvements that were done for annotations. Indication for hidden content in review space. Um, in some cases where, for example, there's a false condition applied on a publication and some content that gets hidden, but still has an overlap with the content that's visible. In those cases, the highlighting was not couldn't be extended to the part that was hidden, and there was no way of finding out if there's missing content that's still not been seen by a user. So a way we've added a way uh, which on the annotation card itself, where it specifies that the annotated content is partially or completely hidden in cases like, for example, because of a condition that was applied. Save and share. We've also added a new option while creating an annotation, both for comments and suggestions, which is save and share. Previously, there was only option to save, and the users could go on creating annotations and just saving them. And it required an additional step if they wanted those annotations to be shared with other users. And then they had to go in and select which ones and then share it. Uh, this option of save and share while creating annotations makes it easier and faster to just create annotation and share it right then and there with other users. Some minor filter enhancements that are done. Previously in the version 14 SV4, there were options to either view resolved annotations or unresolved annotations. You can see as a radio button option here, which has now been improved, and it's a checkbox, so you can have both options enabled, and then you can filter annotations with both options. Also, suggestions as part of annotations. When you wanted to add a proposed change, you would create a suggestion with proposed change, and the reason field in that situation in previous version of Tridion Docs was mandatory. Uh, and in few cases that came across that there could be reasons, there could be situations where the reason field mandatory being is poses a problem. So we have now made this reasons field as configurable. So for customers who would like to have this as mandatory, uh, can configure it that way, or people, or for customers who do not like it to be mandatory, can configure it based on that. Out of the box, it still will be mandatory to add reasons for adding suggestion. Here is an example. I'm showing how we can configure that. So this involves two steps. The first step is to remove the validation from the UI for making it mandatory and non-mandatory. This is how you do it. So under settings, in organized space, XML settings, collective spaces, you have an option you can add, which is annotations, suggestion, reason required as no. This removes the validation and would still need some uh, options to be added to the backend, which is in step number 2. So in step number 2, we go under settings, XML settings, and write plugins. And there you have a check annotation suggestion plugin that you need to comment out or remove in order to complete the second step and remove the validation from the business logic as well. So just doing it on the UI part will not work. You'll have to also do it on the business logic side to make reasons field not mandatory. Now let's take a look at some of the enhancements that were done for image operations. Upload image revision option for draft space. Now in draft space, if you right click on an image, you have an option to upload a revision of that image. And that gives you an option to upload it from a local machine or a local device that you're using. It gets updated as a new revision and not a new version, just to make that clear. The new revision that gets uploaded inherits the preview resolution settings that were applied before. If in case there is an error that takes place, you can see a notification of that error. The upload option is disabled for released components. You will not be able to make changes to image revisions for a released component. Another thing to note here is that the image upload setting is not applied for. So if you go under collect space settings, we have image upload enabled setting as yes or a no, which allows users to either ability to upload image to the repository. Even if that option is disabled, users can still upload a revision for a particular image in draft space. And once an image, for example, is uploaded by another user, uh, there's another option available on a right click menu on an image, which is refresh. So if somebody else has updated a new revision of an image, I can right click refresh and I can see that revision being applied onto my publication without refreshing the browser. Of course, if you refresh the whole publication on the browser, the new image revision is fetched, but this is an option you can do it without a page refresh. There were some enhancements that were also done on tables. Let's take a look at those. Multiple cell selection. We allow users to have a rectangular selection of any size anywhere on the table. And once you've selected that, you can apply some actions onto cells as a group, like merge, bold. You can clear the content. You can change font sizes, etc. This was mainly done to make it feel more familiar to as using a traditional word processor. Another enhancement that was done was to have expandable options in review space for released items. Uh, Previously, if an item was released and has table in it, uh, this side option menu was completely not available, which blocked the user to expand or do a compressed view on a table. We've made this option available, and now even if a table is released, users can do an expand table or even view compressed view of the table. Again, just a reminder, this is for review space and only specifically for items that were released. Then there were some enhancements that were added that allows us to access goal spec attributes. Goal spec element is not selectable in the UI, and therefore on the attributes panel on the sidebar, we could not access goal spec attributes. And this was hindering some of the operations on the tables as well. So now we've introduced option to access goal spec attributes both in draft and review space. On the left side, you see on the draft space, if you select a specific column, there's a new option that's available. You can see this pencil icon here that allows you to access goal spec attributes. And if you click on it, it opens up in a new dialog box. So pop-up, and here you can access and edit, modify, change those attributes. Similarly, in draft space, those options are available, but here it's only it's a different icon to indicate that it's not editable. And if you click on that, you can see those values added of those attributes, but you cannot make any changes in review space. And in some rare instances where a table is malformed, it was copied it from another application, and then some of the elements are missing. We have also added an option to adjust column specification. If you click on that, it kind of adds the missing column specification, and you can continue with your work on the tables. Now let's take a look at attributes panel in review space. Previously, there was no access to technical information in review space. And for some of the reviewers who are technical enough and understand some technical information about components and would like to view that information, for those reviewers, we've added an option to enable attributes panel in review space. Out of the box, this is disabled and is not visible, but you have an option in collective spaces, in organized space, under collective spaces settings. You can have the attributes, you can add this line of code, attributes panel enabled as yes, and it's instantly accessible for the review space. And then users can have access to all technical information about components. In some cases, for images, for example, you can have access to height and width and so on and so forth. We've also added review space. We have also added custom sidebar example in review space. Here is the custom sidebar example code that's available in behavior config. And by default, it's commented out, but you can uncomment that, and that would give you access to custom sidebar example in review space. It was already there for draft space before, but we've added that for review space. Just to note, if condition also is applied for different for draft space and review space here. And another point to note as well is the location of the behavior config file has also been changed. Here is the new path for the file. And this is also because of the modern authentication changes that were done. Here is an example where the review space custom sidebar is enabled. We are just showing an example information. You can see more information about language card ID, for example, logical card ID, version, language, and so on and so forth. A minor enhancement that was done on code block element Previously, the tab key was not allowed to indent code in the code block element, and the users had to rely on using spacebar and different other methods, which made it tedious to organize lines of code. An introduction to using tab key for indenting text is makes it easier to manage if there's long lines of code, lots of lines of code to be organized. Reference menu option. As you can see on the screen, we've added reference menu option to insert elements that are frequently used in reference type topic. Group choice, group composite, and group sequence menus provide ability to insert these elements before, inside, or after the current group positioning of cursor, which is problematic inside a syntax diagram. So we have options to do that using a menu option. We've also added a contextual menu to add title and or remove that element where applicable. Now let's take a look at the demo. Okay, on my screen, let me just zoom in a little bit to make it visible. On my screen, I'm logged in organized space, and I'm under settings, system setting, default settings. Here I have enabled all of these options, and I am able to access draft space and review space. Let me disable these options and give you a quick demo of how it affects on draft and review space. So now I've disabled, and here I am on draft space, and if I try and refresh, I'll see that the draft space is disabled, and I need to contact the administrator to enable it. Also, if I try to access a publication by organized space, those options are not available to launch this publication in either of the applications. Now, if I let me go ahead and enable draft space and review space for now. Then if I refresh, you can see now options to launch draft and review space are available if I select a publication. And then if I refresh this again, I should be able to access that. Now, even if I select any of the components, there's no option available to show history. Let's go in and enable document history for draft space and review space. Refresh this. Then if I select a component, it allows me to view history for that specific component. And another example could be, if I select this one, this gets enabled. So this is also a feature toggle option, and just to remind you again, involves additional licenses and costs. So that was a brief demo for each toggle. Then let me quickly show you the outline on the left. So we've got 4-column layout now. And even these, when are open, are also you can adjust based on your preference. And same goes for the outline on the left, is you can adjust based on your preference. While looking at the outline, you can also have create comment suggestions as well. Gives you easy access to multiple features at the same time. You can also search and or filter by statuses in the outline. You can also, as you can see, there's pencil icon and the comment bubble icon here. And these are driven by the statuses. For example, this one is in draft status, and if I move it to be reviewed, you see the icon changes to be reviewed status here, and I can click on a specific icon and it takes me to that specific section directly. And let's also take a look at how can we customize these icons. So if I go under settings, XML settings, and these are the two line of code where the icons are coming from, and we use the font awesome library. As you can see here, there's plenty of options to pick from. And if I have to, for example, add a check instead of a pencil, I can. So from here, you can actually see the line of code that needs. So it's FA-check that I need to make a change here. So instead of FA-pencil, if I make it FA-check, I save it. Then I refresh. You can see these icons are now for the, instead of pencil, you can see check boxes. So check. You can also do the same for review. For example, right arrow for review. So FA-arrow-right. So if I change this to now that's changed to a right arrow, and you can customize it as per uh, your likings. Then let's also take a look at creating annotations using balloons. So here, let me create and so I have option to save and share as well. Let me just save it for now. And now, so this option is not shared. So options that are not shared are labeled as unshared here. And if you have to share them, you have to go open this menu up, go to share. And here you can see all the list of annotations that are not shared, and you can select, unselect them, and then you can share them. Let me show you quickly for this specific one that we just added. I need to update this content on review space as another user. So as you can see, this option is not available because it's not shared. But if I, for example, add another one here, and then I do save and share, then I refresh. This option, this annotation is available directly. So that makes it easy for me to save and share directly instead of taking another step and then doing that. But that's also an option for some of the users if they like to do it that way. Let's take a quick look at mixed content first, and then we're going to go back to annotations for looking at some other things. Now let's take a look at mixed content. So as you can see here, this is a list item I have added, and if I press enter, there's another list item that it gets added, and if I start typing, just goes, that text goes straight into that list item, and if I press enter again, it creates another list item. However, if I want to add another line instead of a new list, I do shift enter, and that adds a p tag. So that that wraps the start typing context that I added into p tag, and then I have another p tag where I can start in new line. And then if I press enter again, I get exited out. Similarly, in case of, just in case of a table, as you can see here, for example, this is an entry here, and if I press enter, the previous text gets wrapped in a p tag, and I start a new line with a new p tag, and I can actually go in and create an li tag and have my first list item. And then I can press shift enter, which kind of then wraps this text into a p tag, and the new line is also starting with the p tag. And then if I press enter, it automatically goes to the second line item. So this is an example of enhancements that we've done for mixed content. Then also we have filter options, which would resolve and unresolved, which would previously a radio button action, which means we could only do one at a time. Now we can have both. And you can select all if you would like, and then you can set that filter. Now let's take a look at configurable reasons field for suggestion. Let's first see how do we add suggestion. So if I go in and add a suggestion, of this, you can see the reasons field is mandatory here. So for us to make it not mandatory, we go in settings, XML settings, collective spaces. Like I mentioned, there are two steps to this process. The first one is to disable validation in the UI. I've added this line of code already and commented it out. So if I remove this piece of code here and then save it, sorry, send it there. Yeah. And if I go in, if I go back and refresh this, let me save this in the meantime. And now if I try to add a suggestion, you see that star mark from the reason field is gone, which is the change in the UI that we were doing. And if I try and save this annotation now, it's going to give me an error because this is the first part of the change that we've done. Now we have to also go in and do the second part. Go to that. So it's the same settings, XML settings, and now we have to go and write plugin. This one, yeah. So it actually has a line of comments says if you want the reasons field, if you don't want the reasons field on suggestions to be mandatory, you can comment out the following plugin. So we're gonna try and comment this out all the way up until here. Let's save it. And now let's try and create annotation without reason. Let's save and share. And that allows you to do that. So that's a configurable reasons field option. Now let's take a quick look at some of the image operations that were there. Let's start by trying to upload a new revision for this image. Let me replace it with a new image. So I've selected a new image from my local device and I've replaced this image. Now, if you are an editor editing as another user editing it and you would like to see if there's a new revision available, you can refresh and it detects that there's a new revision available and replaces that revision with the previous one. Similarly, you can do the same with this. I would instead like to upload this. So instantly allows you to upload a revision. And then as another user, if I do a refresh, it gets me the updated image here. So that's an example of upload and refresh, both the options that were added for images. Here is an example. So there's the piece in red is hidden content and the green is a condition that is applied. This is condition that is false. This is condition that is true. And there's an annotation that spans from the part that is true to the part that is false. Let's take a look at how this looks when we are in review space. So as you can see, there's only the part that is true is visible here, and there is highlighting of the content. But if I click on this, it gives me some information that there's more annotated content that's currently not visible. So kind of gives you a hint that there might be more to this, and you can take necessary action based on that. Let's take a look at accessing cold spec elements. So here's an example of a table here. So unless I select this, I don't see that option, but if I click inside a cell, I see these options, editing option available. And if I click on it, opens up in a new dialog window. And these are all the cold spec attributes that are available. You can add, remove these. It's translate not set. You can do alignment, you can set left, right, center, and so on and so forth. And similarly in review space as well, these full spec attribute information is available, but it's only in read mode. I can have a look, but I cannot edit that. And here is an example of released topic that has table in it. And now I have option, this side option that gives me access to both these options, to expand table and also have compressed view enabled at the same time. This option was not available before, which kind of made it difficult for reviewers reviewing a release topic with the table. And especially when the table had many rows in it. So as you can see, if you expand table, kind of gives you a better look of the table. So that was table options. Now let's take a look at attributes panel for review space, and that is configurable. So now I'm on review space, and on the sidebar, there's no attributes panel available. Let's try and see the settings for that. So I go under settings, XML settings, collective spaces. This is again, this is on organized space that I'm accessing it. There's a line of code here that I've commented out for the demo, which says attributes panel enabled as yes. And if I save it and I go in and refresh, now you can see this attributes panel available, and then you can have access to some information regarding the elements, so on and so forth. So this is for reviewers who require to access more technical information. They can have this option enabled. There's just one line of code that needs to be added here in organized space. And then just 1 second. And then I think the last topic that I wanted to show was the reference option that's available. As you can see, the group choice, it's difficult even now to click inside, and then there's options that you can use to add a title. Let me refresh this. Click. Can add a title here. You also have option to add insert before this group, insert here, insert after the group, insert before the group, and so on and so forth. So these are some additional options that are available for topic reference type. And that concludes the demo for collective spaces. Let me now give you a quick overview of the enhancements that were done in client tools. So of course, the agenda for client tools, briefly, we're going to just look at some of the impact that modern authentication and access management changes have on client tools. Then we're going to take a look at some content importer command line options that were introduced, followed by condition manager changes that were done. Also, we'll take a look towards the end, a short demo for the condition manager. And finally, we'll take a look at some compatibility upgrades that were done for Tridion Docs 15, specifically for client tools. Because of modern authentication was introduced, there's been changes to the local storage path. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see this is the older structure, and this is the new structure. Previously, the credentials were stored on a local machine, and that's why under the local storage path, account key, there was username folder and baselines, and then username folder would have images, publications, and other files. And now we don't store any credentials on the local machine, so we have all the files available under the account key folder. So that's the change that was done on the local storage paths. If you are upgrading from 14 SB4 to 15, of course, the 15 version will work and will have a new local storage structure applied to it. However, the accounts on versions 14 SB4 or earlier would still work, will still be supported, and the old structure is still applied to those. In some cases, which I assume it is going to be a rare case scenario where we would like to downgrade from 15 to 14. In that case, the accounts of 15 will not work, specifically because of the access management and authentication is not supported by 14 SB4 and previous versions. But your 14 SB4 versions will still work with the old local storage file structures. Also, a quick recap. Previously, the login to client tools used to happen via client tools window, and credentials were stored locally. Here you can see an example of how it used to look. Now it opens up in a new browser, so it gets redirected. So when you open a client tool, you get redirected to the local default browser that's set on your machine, and you can then log in using your credentials on the browser. And if you are already signed in previously, then you see a window like this saying you are signed in, and you can close it. Kind of gives you a single sign-on experience for signing in. So if you've already signed in, it automatically detects that. Just a reminder again, this topic is covered in great detail in the bootcamp session 1. Let's look at content importer. So content importer convert and import. Basically, content importer helps ingest content into the content manager. There are mainly two phases: convert and import. Convert phase generates and prepares metadata, for example, validation of data files against DTDs, creation of file map XML file, replacement of file paths by identifiers in the internal links, etc. So this is done in the convert phase. And then the import phase is where the content actually gets stored into the content manager repository. In the UI, there were option to split these two phases using a checkbox here, which says if you are unchecking it, then the import will wait for your confirmation. So in some cases, you would like to review the converted files before you actually import it into the repository. So this option in the UI helped you do that. We've added these options on the command line this time. So we've split the convert and import command line options with a -p convert and -p import. And if you would like to do both, there's of course -p both option also available. And this is backported to 14SP4 as well. So this option, command line option, is accessible in previous version. Of course, if you are not logged into the content importer and you're trying to access it via console, and you would need a new way of doing that, we've added two options, a -c and a -s option, where you can provide the client secret and client ID respectively using the console. And you have to do this for the first time, and then it keeps you up for the session, and you can access other commands after that. Because the service account, as you can see in access management, you have service account. You can create a new service account, and that will give you the client ID and client secret that can be used. And this topic as well is covered in detail in bootcamp session 1. Now let's look at some of the compatibility upgrades that were done, starting with the upgrading Oxygen. So Oxygen released their latest version 25 late last year, and we've upgraded our Oxygen connectors to support version 25. Version 23 has been deprecated, and older versions than 23 are no longer compatible with Tridion Docs 15. Version 24 is still, and minor versions of 24 are still compatible, but are deprecated, and it's not a recommended option. So even if you're trying to install that, it will give you a warning saying that there's an unsupported version of Oxygen that was detected, but it will still allow you to go through. So you can see this next button is enabled. So it will still allow you to go through, but it'll just let you know that there's an unsupported version. Similarly, for XMetal, XMetal 17 was introduced, and we've upgraded the XMetal connector to support XMetal 17 version. The version 14 is deprecated, and versions older than 14 are not compatible for Tridion Docs 15. Version 15 and 16s were skipped and are not going to be compatible with Tridion Docs 15. So in this case, version 14 or 17 has to be installed. Other versions are not compatible and it will not let you install. Arbortext editor support is also removed. In previous release, Arbortext editor was deprecated, and in Tridion Docs 15 release, the authoring bridge for Arbortext editor is removed from our product offerings. We've also done some upgrades to window scaling for high DPI monitors. High DPI monitors are getting more and more popular, and so more and more of our customers are using high DPI monitors. But when you open a client tool application on a high DPI monitor, the text and icons and images are sometimes too tiny to be visible or readable properly. And the user then has to rely on the Windows zoom option to make things bigger. And now we've done is we've optimized our UI for a better experience that scales proportionally to the Windows scaling option. And then let's look at some of the examples. Here you can see some examples that were applied for a 200% scaling. Here you can see some disabled images in the toolbar were not scaled properly. We fixed those options here, and also images in the list view here were not scaled proportionally, which is fixed now. Here's another example. You can see these icons didn't scale well, which are working well now. Another example, this is on the map outline here. These icons again were not scaling well, which are fixed. There's a lot of UI fixes and optimization that's done for supporting high DPI monitors. Here's another example. These were broken strings, in some cases uh, misaligned fields that are fixed now. So that was regarding the DPI scaling monitor enhancements. Let's take a look at some of the enhancements we've done for the tabs here. As you can see, in the previous versions, the tab size was based on the longest string available. So it would apply the longest string size to all the tabs. In those cases, the strings or the label of the tab, which didn't were not very long, would look like this with a lot of blank spaces on the side, which is not a great user experience. What we've done now is we have a fix with tabs. And if you have a longer string on as a label on the tab, then it gets truncated. But you can always mouse over on it, and then you can see the alt text, uh, and you can read what this text is. So that's for a minor UI enhancement of the tabs view. Then let's take a look at condition manager. So we've removed complex technology, and therefore some of the features of condition manager had to undergo changes. That was using condition management web services. Previously, there were options to upload or download, which allowed multiple users to upload download conditions, which was then merged and processed on the backend side. That is not available anymore. There was also option to synchronize conditions with a third-party application, which also is now removed. So how you do add conditions is using a check-in, check-out. functionality. So as soon as you start editing a file, it checks it out, and then you have a check-in option available. And when you check it in, those changes get applied. And in this uh, enhancement, only one user can update condition manager files at a time. Now let's do a quick demo of condition manager. Now, if you've noticed, so I launched condition manager and it just redirected me to the browser. And as I was already signed in previously, it kind of gave a single sign-on experience here. And I am directly signed into condition manager. I can close this window now and open condition manager. You can see there's a check-in option available, which is disabled right now. I can start adding a new condition. Let's say condition entry country. And as soon as I started editing that, if I go back and see, I'm already checked out. I've checked this file out, and then the check-in option is now available, enabled, sorry. Now let me add as an option here. Okay, and let me check this file in. It's checked in. Now this is publication manager. I assume I'm already signed in. You can see here, yeah, I'm signed in with Bootcamp demo account as an admin. And I am under conditions. Let me show you those changes that we just did. So we added a new field as country with the value USA, and it's already accessible here. And that's how you can now make changes in condition manager and add remove conditions. And that concludes my session for today for client tools. Thank you very much.